year is 1945. Deep beneath the Owl Mountains of Poland, something waits in the darkness, something that was never supposed to be found. A train, but not just any train. An armored Nazi locomotive, sealed and abandoned, carrying what soldiers would later describe as unimaginable wealth. Gold bars stacked like firewood, priceless paintings rolled in canvas, diamonds scattered like gravel, and documents that could have changed everything we know about the final days of the Third Reich. When a small unit of American soldiers stumbled upon what Polish villagers had whispered about for months, they had no idea they were about to uncover one of the most heavily guarded secrets of World War II. A secret so valuable, so dangerous, that even decades later, governments would deny its existence. This is the story of the Ghost Train of Gold, a story of greed, mystery, and a cover-up that reaches the highest levels of military command. What happened in those mountains? What did those soldiers really find? And why has the truth been buried deeper than the train itself? To understand this story, we need to go back to the beginning, back to when Nazi Germany wasn't just fighting a war, they were stealing an empire. Adolf Hitler didn't just want to conquer Europe, he wanted to own it. Every painting, every sculpture, every ounce of gold. The Nazis became the greatest thieves in human history, systematically looting museums, banks, churches, and private collections across every country they invaded. By 1944, as Allied forces closed in from all sides, the Nazis knew their time was running out. Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command, ordered a massive operation. Train after train was loaded with stolen treasure and sent eastward, away from the advancing armies. Gold from the national banks of France and Belgium, priceless artworks from the Louvre and the Uffizi Gallery, religious artifacts plundered from Jewish communities, ancient manuscripts torn from libraries. The scale was staggering. Entire freight cars filled floor to ceiling with humanity's stolen heritage. One train in particular became the subject of legend. It departed from Wrocław, then called Breslau, in late April 1945. The city was surrounded. The Red Army was days away from crushing what remained of German resistance. But this train had to get through. According to Nazi military records that would later surface, the train carried 300 tons of gold bullion, countless crates of jewelry and diamonds, 65 reinforced cases containing artwork valued at over $5 billion in today's currency, and 11 steel trunks filled with classified documents from the highest levels of Nazi command. The destination was supposed to be a secret underground facility near the Austrian border, but the train never arrived. Somewhere between Wrocław and the Austrian Alps, in the labyrinth of tunnels carved through the Owl Mountains near the town of Wałbrzych, the train vanished completely, as if it had been swallowed by the earth itself. In the months after Germany's surrender, Polish villagers near Wałbrzych began telling strange stories. They spoke of seeing German soldiers frantically working through the night in the mountains. They described hearing explosions that shook the valley, followed by absolute silence. Some claimed to have witnessed SS officers sealing tunnel entrances with dynamite and concrete. One elderly farmer swore he watched a massive armored train enter a mountain passage that no longer existed the next morning. The locals called it the Prизрачный поезд, the ghost train, and they warned outsiders never to go looking for it, because everyone who did, they whispered, never came back. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison didn't believe in ghost stories. A decorated officer with the Third Army's Intelligence Division, Harrison had seen enough real horrors during the war that fairy tales about buried treasure didn't impress him. But in August 1945, 3 months after Germany's surrender, Harrison received orders that would change his perspective forever. His unit had been assigned to occupy a sector near Wałbrzych as part of the post-war stabilization force. It was supposed to be a quiet assignment, help local authorities restore order, interview former Nazi officials, secure abandoned military installations, routine work for soldiers who had just survived the bloodiest conflict in human history. But then the rumors started, not from soldiers, but from the Polish civilians. An old woman approached Harrison's interpreter, her hands shaking as she described what she had seen in April. German trucks, SS guards, a train train that went into the mountain but never came out. She begged them to investigate, not for treasure, she insisted, but because her husband had been part of a forced labor crew that sealed the tunnels. He had come home that night, told her what he had seen, and died in his sleep. The doctor said natural causes. She believed otherwise. Harrison dismissed it at first. War made people see things. Trauma created false memories. But then a second witness came forward, then a third, then a former German railway official who produced actual documents, shipping manifests, railway schedules, maintenance records for a tunnel system that officially didn't exist. The lieutenant colonel made a decision. If there was even a chance that Nazi treasure or intelligence materials were hidden in these mountains, it was his duty to investigate. He selected 8 soldiers, men he trusted, combat veterans who wouldn't panic in confined spaces or dangerous situations. He requisitioned mining equipment, explosives, and heavy cutting tools. And on a cold morning in September 1945, they entered the Owl Mountains. The official mission report filed with 3rd Army Headquarters stated simply, routine inspection of abandoned Nazi facilities in Sector 7. No significant findings. But what Harrison's team discovered in those first hours of exploration would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The entrance was exactly where the railway documents indicated, hidden behind a rockfall that looked natural but wasn't. The soldiers spent 2 days clearing debris before they could squeeze through. Inside, the mountain opened into a vast underground complex, not a simple tunnel, but an entire railway yard carved from solid rock, multiple tracks, loading platforms, ventilation shafts that stretched hundreds of feet upward. This hadn't been built in weeks. It was the result of years of engineering, thousands of slave laborers working in darkness to create Hitler's hidden vault. But there was something else, something that made the hair on Harrison's neck stand up. The tunnel showed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the dust, cigarette butts that hadn't fully decomposed, and most disturbing, bloodstains on the concrete platforms. Old blood, but not old enough to be from the war. Sergeant Marcus Chen, the unit's demolitions expert, examined the tunnel walls with his flashlight. "Colonel," he said quietly, "these aren't just storage tunnels. Look at the reinforcement patterns, the sealed chambers. This was designed as a bunker, a place to survive if the world ended." Harrison nodded. "Keep moving. Stay alert. If someone else found this place before us, they might still be here." They pushed deeper, past abandoned equipment, past rooms filled with empty crates bearing Nazi stamps, past workshops where slave laborers had once repaired weapons and vehicles. The air grew colder. The silence became oppressive. And then, 3 kilometers into the mountain, they found the sealed door. It was massive, steel reinforced with concrete, no visible hinges or locks, just a smooth surface marked with the SS Death's Head symbol and a single word stamped in Gothic letters, Geheimnis, secret. Sergeant Chen studied the door for 20 minutes before announcing his assessment. "It's designed to withstand bombing, chemical weapons, probably radiation too. Whatever's behind this, they wanted it protected until the end of time. Can you open it?" Harrison asked. Chen smiled grimly. "Colonel, I can open anything, but it's going to make noise, a lot of noise. If anyone's listening, they'll know we're here." Harrison considered the risk. They were deep inside a foreign mountain, investigating a site that officially didn't exist, searching for treasure that might trigger an international incident. If something went wrong, if they were trapped or attacked, no one would even know where to look for them. But turning back wasn't an option, not after coming this far. "Do it," he ordered. The explosion was carefully controlled, but inside the confined tunnel system, it sounded like the mountain was tearing itself apart. Dust and smoke filled the passage. The soldiers covered their faces, coughing, waiting for the air to clear. When it finally did, they saw that the steel door had been blown inward, creating a gap just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Private David Costa, the smallest member of the team, volunteered to go first. He tied a rope around his waist, took a flashlight, and crawled through the opening. For 30 seconds, there was silence. Then his voice crackled over the radio, barely audible, shaking with something that might have been fear or awe. "Colonel, you need to see this. All of you, right now." They widened the opening with cutting torches and crowbars until everyone could pass through. What they found on the other side defied comprehension. The chamber was the size of an aircraft hangar, and sitting on the rails in perfect condition, as if it had been parked there yesterday, was the train. 6 massive armored cars, each one painted in Wehrmacht gray, with reinforced steel plating covering every window and door. The locomotive was a beast, a Kriegslock heavy freight engine designed to pull massive loads through mountain terrain. But it was what surrounded the train that made the soldiers stop breathing. Stacked along both walls, in neat rows that stretched into the darkness, were crates, thousands of them, wooden boxes stamped with Nazi eagles and shipping codes, metal containers sealed with heavy locks, canvas bags that clinked when touched, and scattered everywhere, as if someone had left in a hurry, were individual pieces of treasure. A golden candlestick lying in the dust, a painting frame propped against a crate, a leather briefcase spilling yellowed documents onto the ground. Harrison approached the nearest train car with his sidearm drawn, though part of him knew it was ridiculous. The war was over. Anyone who had sealed this place was long gone or dead, but instinct kept his finger near the trigger as he climbed the steps and tried the door handle. Locked. Sergeant Chen moved forward with his tools. The lock was German military grade, but Chen had opened hundreds of them during the war. It took him 90 seconds. The door swung open with a groan of unused hinges, and there, stacked floor to ceiling, filling every inch of space, was the gold. Not coins, not jewelry, solid gold bars, each one stamped with the Reichsbank seal and a serial number. Standard 400-ounce ingots that the Nazis had stolen from the national reserves of every country they conquered. Harrison lifted one. It was heavier than it looked, and in the beam of his flashlight, it seemed to glow with its own internal fire. "How much is here?" someone whispered. Harrison did the math in his head. Each bar was worth approximately $14,000 at 1945 prices. There were approximately 60 bars in each stack, at least 200 stacks visible in this car alone, and there were 6 cars. "Enough to fund a small country for a decade," he said quietly. "Maybe longer." But the gold was just the beginning. The second car contained artwork, not random pieces, but masterworks. A Rembrandt, a Vermeer, a Leonardo da Vinci sketch that had been listed as destroyed during the bombing of Berlin. Paintings that belonged in museums were stacked like firewood, wrapped in cloth and oil paper. The third car held jewelry, not the simple gold necklaces and rings looted from ordinary citizens, but royal treasures, crown jewels, religious artifacts encrusted with gems, a diamond-studded Torah cover that must have come from a synagogue, a gold chalice that bore the seal of the Vatican, pieces of history that should never have left their homes. The fourth car was filled with documents, files, ledgers, maps, and what appeared to be personal effects of high-ranking Nazi officials. Harrison flipped through one folder and felt his blood run cold. These weren't ordinary military records. These were intelligence files, lists of Nazi collaborators in Allied countries, details of secret bank accounts in Switzerland, plans for a post-war resistance movement called Werewolf, and blueprints for weapons that looked like nothing he had ever seen. "Colonel," Sergeant Chen called from the fifth car. "You need to see this. Now." Harrison climbed into the car and froze. The space was different from the others. Less cargo, more personal. It looked like someone's office had been transported into a train car. A mahogany desk, leather chairs, filing cabinets, and on the walls, photographs. Hitler with his inner circle, Goering, Goebbels, Himmler. But there was one man who appeared in every photo, standing just behind the Führer, whose face Harrison didn't recognize. "Who is that?" Private Costa asked. "I don't know," Harrison admitted, "but I think we just found someone's escape plan. This wasn't just treasure. This was a mobile headquarters. Someone was supposed to live here, run operations from here, survive here if Germany fell." The sixth car answered the final question. It was filled with supplies, food, water, medical equipment, weapons, ammunition, everything needed to survive underground for months or even years. And in the center of the car, bolted to the floor, was a radio transmitter. The frequency settings were still visible on the dials. Someone had been ready to broadcast from this hidden location. The soldiers stood in silence, processing what they had found. This wasn't just stolen treasure. This was evidence of a plan, a contingency, a way for the Nazi leadership to disappear into the mountains and continue their evil work from the shadows. And judging by the supplies and equipment, someone had intended to actually use this place. "What do we do?" Chen asked. Harrison looked at the train, at the gold, at the documents that could expose collaborators and war criminals who thought they had escaped justice. He thought about the orders he would receive if he reported this, the bureaucracy, the politics, the chance that these treasures would never be returned to their rightful owners. "We document everything," he said finally. "Photographs, inventory lists. Then we seal this place and report directly to General Eisenhower's office. This is too big for standard channels, and whatever happens next, this stays classified. I don't want treasure hunters or looters getting wind of this location. Understood?" The soldiers nodded. They spent the next 3 days photographing every item, cataloging every crate, copying documents by hand. And then they did something that would fuel conspiracy theories for decades to come. They sealed the chamber, collapsed part of the tunnel, and filed a report that made no mention of gold trains or Nazi treasure. But someone was watching, someone who knew the truth, and someone who would make sure these secrets stayed buried forever. 48 hours after Harrison filed his classified report, everything changed. A team of military intelligence officers arrived at the base without warning. They wore no unit insignia, carried no identification beyond letters signed by officials whose names Harrison couldn't verify. Their leader, a man who introduced himself simply as Mr. Graves, informed Harrison that his discovery was now under the jurisdiction of something called Special Operations Recovery Unit. "You and your men did excellent work, Colonel," Graves said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But this matter requires specialized handling, national security implications, diplomatic complications. I'm sure you understand." Harrison didn't understand, but he recognized an order disguised as a request. "What happens to the treasure? The gold belongs to the countries the Nazis stole it from. The artwork needs to be returned to museums. The documents will be handled appropriately," Graves interrupted. "Some items will be returned through proper channels. Others contain sensitive information that could destabilize current peace negotiations. The Soviet Union, for example, has made claims on everything found in their occupation zones. Do you want to start World War III over some Nazi gold, Colonel? I want to do what's right," Harrison said stubbornly. Graves leaned forward. "What's right is keeping this quiet. What's right is preventing a treasure hunt that would tear Poland apart. What's right is making sure the intelligence contained in those documents doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So here's what's going to happen. You and your men will sign non-disclosure agreements. The location of this site will be erased from all maps and records, and you will never speak of this discovery to anyone, ever. Not your commanding officers, not your families, not your priest. Is that clear? And if I refuse, then you'll be court-martialed for theft of recovered war materials and spend the next 20 years in a military prison. Your men will be dishonorably discharged, and the truth will be buried anyway, except your sacrifice will have accomplished nothing." Harrison stared at the man across from him. He had fought Nazis, liberated concentration camps, watched friends die to stop evil, and now this bureaucrat was asking him to become part of a cover-up. But what choice did he have? His men had families, futures. He couldn't destroy their lives over principles, no matter how important. "Fine," he said bitterly. "We'll sign your papers, but I want your word that the stolen property will be returned to its rightful owners." "You have my word," Graves lied smoothly. "Most of it anyway." Over the next week, Graves's team moved into the mountains with heavy equipment. The soldiers in Harrison's unit were confined to base, forbidden from leaving or communicating with anyone outside. They watched trucks and personnel carriers roll past, heading toward the tunnel entrance they had discovered. They heard explosions in the distance, and they noticed something troubling. The trucks that went into the mountains came back heavier than when they left. Sergeant Chen voiced what everyone was thinking. "They're not sealing it, Colonel. They're emptying it. They're taking everything." Harrison knew he was right, but what could he do? Fight his own army? Expose a conspiracy that likely reached the highest levels of command? He had signed the papers, given his word, and sometimes, he told himself, doing the right thing meant living with difficult compromises, but Private Costa refused to stay silent. 2 months after returning to the United States, he contacted a reporter at the Washington Post, told him everything, described the train, the gold, the cover-up. The reporter was intrigued, started investigating, and then, suddenly, the story disappeared. Costa received a visit from 2 men in dark suits, who explained that spreading false stories about military operations was a federal crime. The reporter received a similar visit. The article was never published. Costa tried once more, contacting a congressman he thought he could trust. The congressman promised to look into it. 3 days later, Costa's discharge papers were revised. His honorable discharge became a medical discharge due to war-related psychological trauma and delusional episodes. His military records were flagged, and every time he tried to tell his story, he was dismissed as a veteran, suffering from post-traumatic stress and paranoid fantasies. The other soldiers got the message. They stayed quiet, built their lives, tried to forget what they had seen in those dark tunnels beneath the Polish mountains. But the memories never left. Harrison would wake up in the middle of the night, seeing golden bars stacked to the ceiling. Chen would dream of sealed chambers and whispered conspiracies, and all of them wondered the same thing: what really happened to the Nazi gold train? Meanwhile, in Poland, something strange was happening. The tunnel entrance they had discovered was gone, not just sealed, but erased. The entire section of mountain had been demolished with explosives and buried under a carefully engineered avalanche. New growth had been planted to hide the scars, and Polish authorities, acting on orders from Soviet occupation forces, declared the entire region a military zone. Anyone caught exploring the mountains would be arrested for espionage. But the local villagers remembered. They had watched the American soldiers go into the mountain. They had seen the convoy of trucks carrying away crates in the dead of night. And they began telling a new story, not about a ghost train that vanished, but about a ghost train that was stolen by the very people who claimed to have liberated them. The legend evolved. Some said the Americans had taken the gold to finance the Marshall Plan. Others whispered that it had been divided among generals as spoils of war. A few claimed the entire thing was a hoax, that there never was any treasure, just propaganda to distract from other crimes. But everyone agreed on one thing: the truth had been buried deeper than the train itself. The story should have ended there. A classified discovery, a military cover-up, a secret taken to the grave. But history has a way of refusing to stay buried. And in 2015, 70 years after Harrison's discovery, the legend of the Nazi gold train exploded back into public consciousness. Two men, a Pole named Piotr Koper and a German named Andreas Richter, approached Polish authorities with an extraordinary claim. Using ground-penetrating radar and analysis of wartime documents, they believed they had located an armored Nazi train buried in the mountains near WWII, the exact same region where Harrison had made his discovery in 1945. They demanded a finder's fee, 10% of whatever was recovered, and they wanted legal protection before revealing the exact location. The Polish government was skeptical but intrigued. They formed a special commission to investigate. News media from around the world descended on the small Polish town. Treasure hunters, historians, conspiracy theorists. Everyone wanted to be part of the discovery. The government released radar images that appeared to show something metallic and train-shaped buried approximately 70 feet underground. Experts debated the authenticity. Was this really a Nazi train, or just geological formations and wishful thinking? A team of scientists and engineers began excavation in early 2016. The world watched as they dug into the mountain, expecting to see Nazi gold spill out like something from an Indiana Jones movie. But weeks turned into months. The dig went deeper, and they found nothing. No train, no tunnel, no treasure, just rock and dirt and disappointment. Koper and Richter insisted they had been digging in the wrong location. They produced more radar scans, more documents, more theories. But the Polish government lost patience and shut down the operation. The official conclusion? There was no train. The radar images had been misinterpreted. The whole thing was either an honest mistake or an elaborate hoax. But that conclusion didn't satisfy everyone. Because what if Koper and Richter weren't wrong? What if they had found evidence of Harrison's discovery? What if the reason the dig found nothing was because the train had already been removed 70 years earlier? Dr. Elena Kowalski, a Polish historian who had spent decades researching Nazi looting operations, proposed a controversial theory. The Americans found the train in 1945, she wrote in a paper that was immediately suppressed by academic journals. They removed everything valuable and then destroyed the evidence. The 2015 radar images weren't detecting the original train. They were detecting the remains of the tunnel system and possibly decoy materials left behind to confuse future searchers. She compiled evidence, interviewed descendants of Polish villagers who remembered the American American occupation, found references in declassified documents to special recovery operations in the Wałbrzych region, and discovered something extraordinary: shipping manifests from late 1945 showing unusual cargo transported from Poland to the United States. Heavy crates labeled only as war materials that were never inventoried or accounted for in official records. When she presented her findings at a conference in Warsaw, she was approached by an elderly man who claimed to have been a translator for the U.S. Army in 1945. He remembered Colonel Harrison, remembered the sealed chamber, and remembered being ordered to forget everything he had seen. "They took it all," the old man said. "Truckload after truckload. They worked for 3 weeks, moving cargo through the night, and then they collapsed the tunnels, made it look like there had never been anything there. But I saw the gold, touched it with my own hands, and I've spent 70 years wondering what happened to it." Dr. Kowalski tried to publish his testimony, tried to get official confirmation from U.S. military archives, but every request was denied. The documents she needed were either classified, lost, or mysteriously destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1952. It was as if someone had systematically erased all evidence of the discovery. Other researchers picked up the trail. A German investigator named Klaus Zimmermann found shipping records from the port of Gdansk showing American cargo vessels departing with unusual freight in October 1945. The manifest listed the cargo as recovered military equipment, but the tonnage didn't match. The ships were carrying far more weight than could be explained by captured weapons and vehicles. Where did those ships go? Some docked in New York, others in Norfolk, Virginia, but the cargo records from the American ports were incomplete. What was unloaded? Where was it stored? Who authorized the shipments? Every question led to dead ends and classified files. Zimmerman managed to interview a retired U.S. Army logistics officer who had been stationed in Virginia in 1945. The man, who asked to remain anonymous, remembered processing unusual shipments that arrived with armed guards and orders to ask no questions. Heavy crates that came in under the highest security classification, he recalled. "We loaded them onto trains bound for locations that weren't on any public maps. Government storage facilities out west, places that officially didn't exist. I always wondered what was in those crates. Now I think I know." The most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source. In 2018, a collection of photographs was discovered in an estate sale in Pennsylvania. The photos had belonged to a soldier named David Costa, who had died alone and forgotten in a nursing home. Among the usual family pictures and wartime snapshots was a series of images that shouldn't have existed. Photos of a train inside a mountain chamber, photos of gold bars, photos of artwork and documents, and written on the back of one photograph, in Costa's handwriting, "The treasure they made us forget, September 1945. We found it. They took it. God forgive us." When these photographs surfaced online, they created a sensation. The Polish government demanded explanations. Treasure hunters renewed their search, and the U.S. State Department issued a carefully worded statement denying any knowledge of undocumented treasure recovered from Poland in 1945. But the denial rang hollow, because if the photographs were fake, they were incredibly sophisticated fakes. Experts in digital forensics analyzed them and found no evidence of manipulation. The paper stock and chemical composition of the prints were consistent with 1940s photography. The uniforms and equipment in the images matched U.S. Army specifications from that period. Either these were authentic photos of a real discovery, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create a historically accurate forgery. So what's the truth? Did American soldiers really find a Nazi gold train in the mountains of Poland? And if they did, what happened to the treasure? The official position has never changed. The U.S. government maintains no record of any significant treasure discovery in Poland in 1945. The Department of Defense states that all recovered Nazi assets were properly documented and returned to their countries of origin through established repatriation programs. The gold train, they insist, is nothing more than a legend, a combination of wartime rumors, post-war confusion, and wishful thinking. But that explanation doesn't account for the evidence, the testimonies, the photographs, the shipping manifests, the mysterious classified operations, the systematic suppression of any investigation into the matter. If there was nothing to hide, Why go to such lengths to bury the story? Some historians believe a middle ground. They argue that American soldiers did discover Nazi treasure in Poland, but not the legendary full train described in the stories, perhaps a single car or a hidden cache that had been separated from the main convoy. They recovered what they found, documented it, and turned it over to proper authorities. The treasure was eventually returned, though the process took decades and some items were never recovered. The cover-up wasn't about theft, but about preventing a treasure hunt that would have destabilized post-war Poland. Others point to the uncomfortable reality of war. Resources disappear. Chain of custody breaks down. Soldiers face impossible temptations when surrounded by unimaginable wealth. Perhaps there was no grand conspiracy. Perhaps individual soldiers or officers took what they could carry. Perhaps some gold bars ended up in private collections, sold quietly over the years, their origin never questioned. War creates opportunities for both heroism and corruption, sometimes in the same people. The most cynical interpretation suggests that the treasure was indeed recovered, but at the highest levels of government, a decision was made that it was too valuable to return. The Cold War was beginning. The Marshall Plan needed funding. Intelligence operations required untraceable money, and sitting in a Polish mountain was a fortune in gold that technically belonged to countries that couldn't prove they had ever possessed it. Why not use it for the greater good? Why not let the train become a legend while the gold became a secret slush fund? Dr. Kowalski has a different theory. She believes multiple trains were hidden in the Owl Mountains. The Americans found one, removed its contents, and covered up the discovery. But the others remain buried, waiting to be found. The 2015 radar images, she argues, detected one of these other trains. The dig failed because they were looking in slightly the wrong location, or because the tunnel had collapsed naturally over 70 years, or because someone had actively sabotaged the excavation to prevent discovery. The Nazis built an extensive underground network in these mountains, she explains. Dozens of tunnels, multiple storage facilities. They called it Project Reese, the Giant. The amount of slave labor involved suggests they were building something far larger than we've ever discovered. If they hid one train full of treasure, why not 3 or 5 or 10? Or that possibility has kept treasure hunters searching, despite official discouragement, despite the failed 2015 excavation, despite the dangers of exploring unstable tunnels in remote mountains. People continue to believe. They study old maps, interview elderly locals who remember the war, use ground-penetrating radar and metal detectors to scan the mountain range. Because if even a fraction of the legend is true, the prize would be worth the risk. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of this story isn't what was found, but what was lost. If a massive treasure was recovered and never returned, then families who had their heirlooms stolen by the Nazis lost them twice. Museums that should house masterpieces continue to display empty walls, and history itself becomes unreliable when governments can erase inconvenient truths and replace them with comfortable lies. Colonel Harrison died in 1987 without ever speaking publicly about what happened in September 1945, but according to his daughter, in his final days, he kept muttering about gold and mountains and promises he shouldn't have kept. He never told us the details, she said in a rare interview, but I know something happened in Poland that haunted him for 40 years, something he was ordered to forget but never could, and I think he died believing he had failed some fundamental test of character. The other soldiers carried similar burdens. Sergeant Chen became a successful engineer, but refused to work on any military contracts. Private Costa spent decades trying to tell his story before giving up in bitter resignation, and one by one they took their secrets to the grave, leaving only fragments of truth scattered among decades of lies. Deep beneath the Owl Mountains of Poland, in tunnels that officially don't exist, something might still be waiting. A train sealed in darkness, gold bars stacked in the silence, paintings gathering dust, and documents that could rewrite history. Or perhaps it's all gone, removed 70 years ago under cover of night, scattered to the four corners of the world, lost to history forever. The truth, like the train itself, remains buried, hidden by governments who decide what the public should know, protected by men who followed orders and kept their silence, and guarded by the mountains themselves, which have kept their secrets since the war ended. Whether Colonel Harrison found the greatest treasure of World War II or just stumbled into a well-crafted legend we may never know with certainty. But one thing is clear. In the chaos and darkness of war's end, something happened in those Polish mountains, something valuable, something secret, something that powerful people decided should stay hidden. And perhaps that's the real treasure, not the gold or the art, but the truth itself. A truth so valuable, so dangerous, that even after 80 years, governments and militaries continue to deny its existence, because acknowledging it would mean answering uncomfortable questions about victory, honor, and what we're willing to sacrifice in the name of peace. The ghost train of gold remains one of the greatest mysteries of World War II, a reminder that even in our most documented conflicts, some stories slip through the cracks, some secrets survive the archive, and some treasures, whether real or imagined, haunt us forever.